The night had fallen hard on Cedar Creek, the kind of winter night that presses against the windows and makes even silence feel heavy. I had just finished labeling a tray of dried herbs when Bruno, my old shepherd mix, lifted his head from the hearth. One sharp bark cut through the stillness, then another, and before I could ask what was wrong, he was already at the door, pawing at it with an urgency I'd never heard from him. "Bruno, what is it?" My voice sounded louder than I intended in the quiet cabin. He gave a low, anxious whine and glanced back at me, tail stiff, ears pointed toward the frozen dark beyond the porch. I hesitated, staring at the storm swirling outside. Even for Montana, it was bitter tonight, the kind of cold that bites through layers and lingers in your lungs. Most people in town wouldn't even think of leaving their fireplaces. But Bruno wouldn't settle, his amber eyes locked on mine, pleading and commanding all at once. All right, I'm coming." I grabbed my parka, pulled my beanie low, and switched on the heavy-duty flashlight I used for late-night herb collecting. Bruno bolted into the darkness, and I followed, boots crunching over crusted snow, breath turning to white clouds in the frigid air. The beam of my flashlight danced between pine trunks, picking out drifts and deer tracks, and then something pink, almost out of place against the white and gray. Bruno was circling it, tail wagging, whining softly now. It wasn't something. It was someone. A tiny girl, no more than 4, maybe 5, sat hunched in the snow. She wore a bright pink winter coat with a ridiculous pom-pom hat and tiny embroidered boots, the kind that said someone loved her enough to dress her warmly. Yet somehow, she was out here alone. My stomach clenched. "Oh, sweetheart!" I knelt, setting the flashlight down so I could lift her face gently. Her cheeks were pale under the cold's kiss, lips faintly blue. She didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Her eyes, startlingly big and impossibly blue, just stared through me as though I weren't there at all. "Let's get you inside, okay?" I pulled my parka from my shoulders and wrapped it around her small frame, tucking her icy hands against her chest. Bruno stayed close, his warm breath fogging in the beam of light as if he, too, understood the gravity of this. Back at the cabin, I placed her near the wood stove, rubbing her tiny fingers to coax warmth back into them. She neither cried nor resisted, only blinked slowly as the heat enveloped her. "What's your name, honey? Can you tell me?" My voice was as soft as the wind outside was brutal. Nothing, just that silent, hollow gaze. I made chamomile tea, nothing fancy, just warm and sweet with a hint of honey. When I held the mug to her lips, she sipped obediently, eyes never leaving mine. Yet there was no spark, no fear, no relief, nothing I'd expect from a child pulled from near-frozen woods. A quiet shiver traveled down my spine. It wasn't the cold, it was her. After she finished the tea, I gave her one of my spare thermal shirts and tucked her into my bed, layering the wool blanket over her small body. Bruno settled at the foot, a silent sentinel. She didn't resist, didn't curl into the pillow like most kids. She just lay there, staring up at the rafters, until slowly her eyelids closed. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at that still, porcelain-like face. Something about it felt wrong, not in a way that frightened me, but in a way that whispered of an old sadness I recognized too well. I'd felt it once in my own reflection years ago, the day I left the city and chose this quiet life among trees and herbs. My breath hitched. "Who left you out there?" I whispered, though I knew there'd be no answer tonight. I stroked Bruno's head, forcing calm into my chest. "We'll figure it out tomorrow. Right now, she's safe. That's what matters." Bruno's tail thumped softly. I managed a small smile and dimmed the lantern, leaving only the glow of the fire licking against the iron stove. Still, even as I crawled into the chair beside the bed, blanket wrapped around my shoulders, I couldn't take my eyes off the little girl. Something about her silence, it didn't feel like ordinary shock. It felt practiced, like she had been living in it for a long time. And that, more than the storm, kept me awake long into the night. By morning, the storm had eased, leaving behind a pale gray sky and the kind of stillness only heavy snow can create. My cabin smelled of pine resin and dried lavender, comforting scents I'd grown used to. But this morning they felt strangely sharp, like they didn't belong in the same room as the silence radiating from the little girl in my bed. She was awake, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling beams as if counting them, or maybe not seeing them at all. I crouched next to the bed and gave her what I hoped was a warm, reassuring smile. "Hey, sweetheart, how are you feeling? Warm enough?" Nothing. No nod, no shake of her head. Just those enormous blue eyes meeting mine briefly before sliding away again. I set down a steaming cup of mint and lemon balm tea, the same mix I used on sleepless nights. "It's just tea. Sweet. Wanna try?" I gently held it toward her, half expecting a flinch, a whisper, something. But she simply took the mug, her tiny fingers trembling from cold, or something deeper, and sipped slowly. When she was done, she placed it on the table beside her with deliberate care, like a child much older than her years. But she still said nothing. "Can you tell me your name?" I tried again, softer this time. Silence. Even her breathing seemed quiet, too measured for a child. I'd met kids in shock before, through field work, even once on a volunteer trip in Alaska, but they all had one thing in common. Eventually, the dam of emotion would break and tears would come. This child, nothing. Not one tear, not one frown, not even confusion in her eyes. Bruno lay at her feet, head resting on his paws, ears twitching whenever I spoke. Dogs are quick to read people, and Bruno wasn't tense, but he wasn't relaxed either. He watched the girl as if she were an unfamiliar species he hadn't decided how to approach yet. I went into the kitchen, started oatmeal with dried blueberries. The normal sounds of breakfast, the kettle's hiss, the wooden spoons scraping the pot, felt too loud, like they might shatter her silence. When I brought the bowl back, she took it politely and ate every spoonful, still not speaking, still watching me in that strangely detached way. "Sweetheart, did you get lost? Are your parents looking for you? Did something happen?" Still nothing. A knot tightened in my chest. There were no obvious bruises, no torn clothing, no signs of abuse I could see, but I had been around enough hurt people to know the signs aren't always on the skin. Something about her stillness wasn't natural, it was learned. I wrapped one of my thick wool scarves around her shoulders and knelt so I could look her in the eye again. "Listen, you're safe now. I promise. No one is going to hurt you here." Her gaze lingered on me for a moment, just a flicker of something behind those glassy eyes, like she'd heard me but didn't know what to do with it. Then, just as quickly, the wall came back up and she turned her face toward the window. I exhaled slowly and sat back on my heels. My mind spun through possibilities. Maybe she was autistic, maybe she'd been traumatized, maybe both. Whatever the case, she needed someone, and at that moment, that someone happened to be me. Bruno shifted, letting out a low chuff as if to agree. I reached out and stroked his fur, grounding myself in the warmth of his steady presence. "Okay," I murmured to no one in particular, one step at a time. "First, we get you safe. Then we figure out who's missing you." I tucked her in again and stood by the door, staring out into the snow-covered world. Somewhere out there was a reason why this little girl had been alone, silent, and freezing in the woods. And I had a sinking feeling I wasn't going to like the answer when it came. And yet a part of me already knew I wouldn't stop until I found it. The knock came just after dawn, sharp and frantic, rattling the thin window panes of my cabin. Bruno bolted upright, barking with that deep-chested urgency he reserved for strangers. I froze for half a second, heart thudding, before I pulled on my coat and cracked the door open. A man stood on my porch, breath steaming in the icy morning air, a girl of about 11 clinging to his sleeve. Snow clung to his boots and the edges of his jacket like he'd been searching all night. His face, drawn, pale, eyes raw from the cold and lack of sleep, was enough to tell me why he was here even before he spoke. Please, his voice cracked. We're looking for a child. My daughter. Have you seen a little girl? Pink coat, pom-pom hat. Bruno barked again, but I held up a hand to quiet him. She's inside. She's safe. The man exhaled like someone who'd been holding his breath for hours. He stumbled past me into the cabin without hesitation, pulling off his gloves with shaking hands. The older girl followed, her eyes darting around my small space before settling on the figure still curled under the blanket on my bed. "Milana!" he whispered, voice breaking on the name as he rushed to her side. He scooped her up in his arms, holding her so tight I could hear the fabric of her coat squeak. "Oh, thank God, thank God." The little girl, Milana, didn't resist. She didn't even return his embrace. She just let herself be held, face expressionless, eyes staring over his shoulder as if she were somewhere else entirely. The older girl stepped closer, hovering by her father's side. She looked at Milana with an expression I couldn't quite place. Relief, yes, but tinged with something sharp, something like fear or guilt. Her small hands fidgeted with the hem of her jacket, twisting it over and over. "I found her last night," I said softly, not wanting to intrude but feeling I should explain. "She was near the old logging road, sitting in the snow. If Bruno hadn't pulled me out there," I shook my head, "she wouldn't have lasted much longer." The man turned, eyes glassy. "I don't even know how to thank you. I was terrified we'd lost her for good. My name's Fedor Brooks. This is my older daughter, Sophie." Sophie glanced up, muttered a quiet hi without meeting my eyes, then looked quickly back at Milana. "She hasn't spoken a word since I brought her in," I said gently, watching as he adjusted Milana on his hip. "Does she usually?" He gave a weary, sad smile. "Milana doesn't talk much. She has some developmental challenges. Doesn't really react like other kids. But she's ours and we love her. When she disappeared last night," his voice trailed off, too choked to finish. Sophie shifted again, hugging herself. For a split second, I caught her eyes, and there was something there, guilt, raw and heavy, but she looked away before I could read more. "Where's her mother?" I asked, mostly to fill the silence. "At home," Fedor said quickly, adjusting Milana's hat. "Anna, my wife. She's with the police, coordinating the search. She'll be relieved. God, she's going to be so relieved." I nodded, but couldn't shake the subtle chill under my skin. Something about the way Sophie stood behind him, about the way Milana hung limp in his arms, watching me with those same hollow eyes she'd given me last night, it all felt wrong somehow. Fedor turned back to me, gripping my hand hard enough to make my fingers ache. "Thank you. You saved her life." I smiled, faintly, brushing off the praise. "I'm just glad Bruno dragged me out there when he did. She's warm now, she's eaten. But," I hesitated, choosing my words carefully, "she's very quiet even for a child in shock. You might want to have her looked at when things calm down." He nodded quickly. "We will. Absolutely. Right now, I just need to get her home." Sophie finally stepped forward, reaching for her sister's hand. "Hi, Mila," she whispered, voice trembling. "You scared me." Milana didn't respond. She didn't even look at her sister. The silence stretched until Bruno let out a soft whine, as if voicing what we were all feeling but couldn't say. I folded my arms, watching them from the doorway as they stepped back into the snow. Something in Sophie's hunched shoulders told me this story wasn't as simple as a child wandering off. Something had driven her into that storm, and the answer wasn't going to be easy to hear. As their figures disappeared into the pale morning, I felt a pang in my chest. I'd saved Milana's life, yes, but I couldn't shake the feeling this wasn't over. Not even close. They left quickly that morning, Fedor carrying Milana against his chest while Sophie trudged behind him, her head bowed like she carried something far heavier than a night of worry. I stood on the porch for a long time after the door shut, watching their footprints fade into the white haze. Something gnawed at me. That child hadn't spoken a word since I'd found her, not even to her own family. And Sophie, her face when she'd seen Milana, it wasn't just relief. It was something sharper, something that twisted behind her eyes and then vanished when she looked away. By late afternoon, my phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered anyway. Ms. Gardner. The voice was hesitant, tired. It's Fedor Brooks. I just wanted to thank you again. And, well, I wanted to stop by later if that's all right. I owe you more than I can say. I hesitated only a moment. All right, I'll put coffee on. When they arrived, Fedor looked better, less frantic, but still worn down. Sophie followed, clutching the strap of her backpack as if it were a lifeline. Milana was at home, he explained. His wife, Anna, had insisted on staying with her. Anna's still shaken, he said, sitting at my kitchen table. She thought we'd lost Milana forever. He rubbed his hands over his face, sighing. She gets anxious about Milana. Always has. I poured him coffee and set a cup of chamomile in front of Sophie, who offered me a faint, polite nod. Milana has a condition, Fedor continued, his voice heavy. They call it a developmental disorder. But honestly, even the doctors don't fully know what's wrong. She's quiet, doesn't engage much, and, well, she's just different. Anna says it's our job to protect her no matter what. I nodded, listening carefully. His words were calm, but there was a current beneath them, a tension he probably didn't even hear himself. And Sophie? I asked, glancing toward the girl, who was staring down at her tea, shoulders tense. He smiled, but it was sad and brief. Sophie's a good kid. Smart, independent, sometimes too independent. She's from my first marriage. My wife, Elena, passed away when Sophie was just a toddler. For a long time, it was just me and her. His voice softened. Then I met Anna and she brought stability, I guess. She loves Milana fiercely. Always has. But Sophie, his words trailed off unfinished, and I saw Sophie stiffen, slightly at the sound of her name. You love both your daughters, I said gently. Of course I do. He said it quickly, almost defensively, like someone trying to convince himself. But Sophie's older now, and Anna thinks she should handle more responsibility, chores, homework, even looking after Milana sometimes. It's been an adjustment. I studied Sophie for a moment. She was tracing her finger along the rim of her teacup, her face blank, but her jaw tight. I knew that look. I'd seen it in mirrors once upon a time, back when I'd been the one standing on the edges of someone else's life, feeling unseen and unheard. What happened last night, Fedor? I asked finally. Kids don't just wander into the woods alone in a storm. Did Milana slip out on her own? He hesitated, fingers tightening around his coffee cup. We don't know. Anna was with her. I was finishing up work on the farm. Sophie was upstairs. 1 minute, she was playing quietly, the next gone. Anna blamed herself, of course. But I don't know Elise. Sometimes I wonder if Milana even understands danger the way other kids do. She just drifts. Sophie suddenly looked up at him, something sharp flashing in her eyes, but she didn't speak. Bruno patted over and nudged her leg gently, earning a faint smile before her face closed up again. Thank you for telling me, I said quietly. I'm just glad she's safe. Fedor nodded, grateful, but his eyes were distant. I wondered if he even noticed the way Sophie sat stiffly, how her fingers twisted the strap of her bag until her knuckles whitened. When they left, the house felt heavier, as if their problems had seeped into my walls and settled like dust. I leaned against the doorframe, thinking of Milana's vacant stare and Sophie's averted eyes. Something was wrong in that household, not the kind of wrong you could see on the surface, but the kind that builds quietly, silently until one night a child ends up alone in the freezing woods and no one really knows why. I pulled my shawl tighter around my shoulders and whispered to Bruno, "This isn't the end of it, is it?" He rested his chin on my knee, looking at me with eyes too wise for a dog, and I knew my instincts were right. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. It was the next day when Sophie came back to my cabin. She didn't knock, just stood outside until Bruno barked and I opened the door. Her face was pale, and she clutched the same backpack from yesterday, holding it like a shield. "Hi." Her voice was soft, almost uncertain. "Dad's in town. I wanted to talk." I motioned her in, keeping my tone light. "Of course. Come in, warm up." She perched on the edge of the chair near the fireplace, her hands twisting together. Bruno wandered over, nudged her arm with his nose, and she gave him a shaky smile before looking down at the floor. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "You're probably wondering how Milana ended up in the woods." I nodded slowly. I figured there was more to it than her just wandering off. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. She seemed determined not to let fall. "It's my fault," she said finally, her voice breaking. "I took her out there. I left her." The words hit like a cold wind. "You left her?" She nodded, covering her face with her hands. "I didn't mean for her to get hurt. Her voice cracked again. "I just wanted Dad to notice me. He never does anymore. It's all about Milana, her therapy, her special diet, her appointments. Every time I try to talk to him, he says he's busy. And Anna, she doesn't even like me. She says I'm clumsy, that I don't help enough." She pulled her hands down, and her eyes, wet and red, locked onto mine. "Last night she yelled at me because I ripped my jacket sleeve on the fence. She said I was useless, that I cost them money they didn't have. And Dad, he didn't say anything. He just looked at Milana like she was made of glass, like she was the only one worth worrying about. So I thought if Milana was gone for a little while, maybe he'd care about me again." My chest tightened. I'd seen this before. Children acting out, not because they're bad, but because they're drowning in pain no one sees. "What were you planning, Sophie?" I asked softly. I just wanted to scare them a little. I thought I'd bring her back once everyone freaked out. But when I put her down in the woods, she just stood there. Didn't cry, didn't move, didn't even look scared. I told her to stay, and she just did. Like she didn't care what happened to her. And then I ran home. Her breath came fast, ragged. By the time I got back, everyone was looking for her, and I couldn't say anything. I was too scared. I thought if they found out, they'd hate me forever. She dropped her gaze again, shoulders shaking. Bruno rested his head on her knee, and she absently stroked his fur, tears finally sliding down her cheeks. I crouched beside her, placing a gentle hand on her arm. "Sophie, look at me." She hesitated, then lifted her tear-streaked face. "You made a mistake, a serious one. But it came from pain, not from hate. You wanted someone to see you, to care about you. That doesn't make you evil. It makes you human and hurting." Her lip trembled. "Do you think Dad will forgive me?" I thought about Fedor, about the way his eyes had filled with tears when he'd held Milana, and the way he'd spoken about Sophie with that quick, defensive tone. "I think your dad loves you, Sophie. He's just lost in everything that's happening with Milana. Sometimes adults forget that older kids still need them just as much as the little ones do." Sophie sniffled. "Anna won't forgive me." "Maybe not at first," I admitted. "But this isn't about Anna right now. It's about you and your dad, and about making sure something like this never happens again." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "What if Milana had died?" I took a slow breath. "Then you'd be carrying that for the rest of your life. But she didn't die. She's safe because you told me the truth now. That means we have a chance to fix things before it's too late." Sophie hugged her backpack to her chest like it could shield her from the weight of her choices. "Do you think you could come with me? When I tell Dad, I don't think I can do it alone." I hesitated. This wasn't my family, and I'd already done more than most strangers would. But something in Sophie's eyes, the same hollow ache I'd seen in Milana's, made it impossible to say no. "Yes," I said. "I'll go with you." She gave a tiny, shaky nod, relief washing over her face like a fragile sunrise. As she stood to leave, Bruno trotted alongside, tail wagging. For once, Sophie smiled without forcing it. Watching her walk out into the crisp air, I felt that familiar pull in my chest, the one that had brought me out here in the first place, to heal my own wounds in solitude. Except now, for the first time in a long time, I wondered if maybe solitude wasn't the only way to heal. Because sometimes what we run from has a way of finding us again, only this time in someone else's pain. And when it does, we have to decide, keep running or finally stop and help carry it. I chose to stop, and I had a feeling Sophie's confession was only the beginning of what this family needed to face. That evening, I drove Sophie back to her house. She sat quietly in the passenger seat, fingers clasped tight, as if holding on to her courage before it slipped away. The Brooks home sat at the edge of a snow-covered field, a modest farmhouse with lights glowing warm behind frosted windows. From the outside, it looked like a picture of stability, but I already knew appearances lied. Fedor met us at the door, surprise flickering across his tired face when he saw me. "Elise, is everything all right?" Sophie froze at my side. I placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "She has something to tell you, and I think you need to hear it." He frowned slightly but nodded, stepping aside to let us in. The scent of stew lingered in the kitchen, comforting in a way, but tension hummed beneath it. Anna sat at the table, scrolling through her phone, her eyes darting up briefly before settling back on the screen. Sophie stood in the doorway, shoulders trembling. "Dad, I'm the reason Milana was in the woods." The words tumbled out in a whisper, barely audible, but they seemed to shatter the air around us. Fedor blinked, his mouth opening slightly as if unsure he'd heard her right. "Sophie, what are you saying?" She gripped her hands together, so tight her knuckles whitened. "I took her out there. I just wanted you to notice me again. I wanted you to care about me like before. But I didn't mean for her to get hurt, I swear. I'm so sorry, Dad." Anna's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "You did what?" Her voice was sharp enough to cut. "Do you have any idea?" "Anna," I interrupted gently but firmly, stepping slightly forward. "This is about listening, not punishing." She came forward because she's scared and hurting, not because she wants to make excuses. Anna's jaw tightened, but she fell silent. Fedor turned to his daughter, his face pale. "Sophie!" He crouched so he was eye level with her, his hands trembling as they reached for hers. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" Tears spilled down Sophie's cheeks. "Because I thought you'd hate me. You only care about Milana now. I feel like I don't even exist anymore." The room went silent except for Sophie's quiet sobs. Fedor closed his eyes, pain flashing across his face. "Oh God, Sophie, I never meant to make you feel that way. When your mom died, I promised I'd always protect you. But I failed. I thought giving Milana what she needed was enough, but I didn't see how much it was taking from you." Anna shifted uncomfortably, crossing her arms. "We did what we had to do. Milana needs special care, and so does Sophie," I said softly. "Just because she's older doesn't mean she stopped needing her father's attention." Fedor looked at his eldest daughter with tears welling in his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Sophie. I should have been there for you." He pulled her into his arms, and this time she clung to him like she hadn't in years. Anna stood, pacing slightly, her voice rising. "So what now? Are we supposed to just forget she abandoned Milana in the woods?" "No," I said calmly, "but you can choose to see why it happened and fix it before something worse happens next time. Kids act out when they feel invisible. Sophie wasn't trying to hurt Milana. She was crying for help the only way she knew how." Anna's lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, I thought she would argue, but instead, she sat back down, exhaling heavily. That night, after Sophie had gone upstairs, Fedor and I sat at the kitchen table. The weight of everything settled between us. Heavy but not hopeless. He rubbed his hands over his face. "I don't know how to fix this. Anna and Sophie have been clashing for months, and I thought it was just growing pains. I didn't see how deep it went. Start by listening, I said gently, and by making time for Sophie. She doesn't want to replace Milana. She just wants to know she still matters to you. He nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping. You sound like you've lived this before. I hesitated, then smiled faintly. I know what it's like to feel invisible in your own home. I know what happens when no one listens. My gaze drifted toward the window, where snowflakes floated silently under the porch light. And I know how far people will go to feel seen again. Fedor leaned back, exhaling sharply. You've already done more for my family than I can thank you for. I didn't do this for thanks, I said quietly. I did it because Sophie trusted me enough to tell the truth. Don't waste that trust. He looked at me, then a long, searching look that said more than words could. Finally, he nodded. I won't. When I left that night, Bruno trotting at my side, I glanced back at the farmhouse. The light in Sophie's room glowed faintly, and I hoped, just maybe, that something had shifted. But deep down, I knew healing wouldn't come overnight. It would take time, forgiveness, and effort from everyone, especially Anna, who seemed unwilling to let go of her rigid grip on control. Still, I had seen something tonight I hadn't expected. A crack in the wall they'd all built between each other. And sometimes that's all it takes for the light to get in. Driving home through the quiet snow, I felt the weight in my own chest ease. Maybe this wasn't just their healing. Maybe it was mine too. 2 days later, I returned to the Brooks house. Fedor had called, asking if I could stop by. His voice over the phone had carried a weight that made me say yes without hesitation. When I arrived, Sophie was sitting on the porch steps, her knees tucked to her chest. She looked up when I approached, her eyes still red but calmer than before. Hi, Elise, she said softly. I sat beside her, pulling my coat tighter against the chill. Hi, sweetheart. How are you holding up? She shrugged. Dad's been trying. He spent yesterday helping me with homework. We even made pancakes this morning. A small smile appeared and disappeared almost immediately. But Anna's mad. She doesn't really talk to me right now. That's hard, I admitted. Sometimes grown-ups don't handle hurt the right way. But it doesn't mean it will always stay this way. Her voice trembled. Do you think she'll ever like me? I turned toward her, meeting her worried eyes. Sophie, sometimes people's hearts take longer to open, especially when they feel protective of someone. But this isn't your fault alone. Adults make mistakes too. We sat in silence for a while until Fedor stepped outside. His face looked older, lined with fatigue, but his eyes softened when he saw Sophie. We're trying something new tonight, he said gently, looking at me. A family meeting. I thought maybe you could stay, Elise. You seem to know how to calm things down. Inside, Anna sat stiffly at the table, her arms folded. The tension was thick enough to touch. Sophie sat down cautiously, eyes flicking between her stepmother and her father. Fedor cleared his throat. We need to talk about what happened, not just about Milana, but about all of us. We can't keep pretending we're okay when we're not. Anna's lips thinned, but she nodded. Fine, let's talk. Sophie stared at the table, whispering, I'm sorry. I know what I did was wrong. I felt like I didn't matter anymore. Anna shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Fedor before looking back at Sophie. You scared me. You scared all of us. I thought I'd lost her. But I didn't realize you felt that way. She hesitated, then sighed. I haven't been fair to you. Sophie's eyes widened. You mean that? Anna nodded slowly. I was so focused on protecting Milana, I didn't see how I was hurting you. She looked away, swallowing hard. I'm sorry too. The silence that followed wasn't heavy like before. It was fragile, like something new being built. I spoke, quietly breaking it. Families aren't perfect. But what you do after mistakes, that's what matters. Sophie took a brave step telling the truth. Anna, you took a brave step admitting you've been harsh. This is how healing starts. Fedor reached for both their hands, pulling them gently together. We're going to figure this out. No more ignoring feelings. No more letting hurt sit in the dark. We're a family. All of us. Sophie nodded, tears brimming in her eyes, but a small smile pulling at her lips. Anna squeezed her hand, hesitant at first, then firmer. I felt something loosen in my chest watching them. This family had a long road ahead, but they had finally taken their first real step. When I stood to leave, Fedor walked me to the door. I don't know how to thank you, Elise, he said quietly. You don't have to, I replied. Just keep showing up for each other. That's thanks enough. Bruno wagged his tail as I stepped outside, the cold air crisp against my face. For the first time since finding Milana in the snow, I felt hope. Real hope that this family might actually heal. The night after the family meeting, I sat by my cabin window, a cup of nettle tea warming my hands. Outside, the snow glowed faintly under the moonlight, unbroken except for Bruno's paw prints circling lazily around the porch. It was quiet again, my kind of quiet, but it felt different now. I thought about Sophie's face when Anna finally took her hand, the way relief and disbelief mixed together in her teary eyes. I thought about Fedor finally seeing both daughters, not just one. And I thought about Milana, still silent, still wrapped in that strange shell of detachment, but now surrounded by a family that seemed willing to try. For so long I had chosen solitude. I told myself it was for peace, for focus, for healing. But nights like this reminded me it was also because I'd stopped trusting people. I knew what it felt like to be invisible, to feel like someone else's pain mattered more than yours. Maybe that's why I couldn't let Sophie's confession slide into silence. Bruno patted over, placing his head on my knee. Amber eyes looking up at me like he understood every unspoken thought. I smiled faintly, stroking the soft fur between his ears. We did good, didn't we? His tail thumped once in quiet agreement. Later that week, I visited the Brooks farm again. Milana was playing in the yard, stacking snow into uneven towers. Sophie hovered nearby, not as distant as before, almost protective. When she saw me, she ran over, cheeks flushed from the cold. Guess what? She said, a shy grin breaking across her face. Dad signed me up for art classes in town. He said he wants to see what I like, not just what needs doing. I grinned back. That's wonderful, Sophie. How does it feel? She looked down at her boots, then back at me, her eyes bright. Like he sees me again. Anna appeared in the doorway, waving. Her expression was softer, less guarded. Come in for coffee, Elise. It's cold out here. Inside, the air felt lighter somehow, as if someone had opened a window in a long-closed room. Fedor thanked me again, though I told him I hadn't done much. In truth, I had only listened, and sometimes that's all people need to find their own way back. When I left, Sophie hugged me, awkward but earnest. Milana stood by the door watching. For a second, our eyes met, and I thought I saw something there, a flicker, tiny and fleeting but real. It wasn't a smile, not exactly, but it was something new. Driving home, I realized something I hadn't let myself believe in years. Solitude had healed me, yes, but connection was what kept me whole. Back at the cabin, I opened my old research journal. On the last page, where I normally wrote notes about soil quality and plant compounds, I scribbled something different. Healing doesn't just come from roots and leaves. Sometimes it comes from holding someone's pain long enough for them to breathe again. I closed the book and looked out at the snow one more time. Somewhere beyond those trees was a family learning to love each other again, to see each other again. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just the woman who lived alone in the woods. I was someone who'd stepped back into the world, even if just for a moment, and maybe, just maybe, I was ready to keep doing it. Because sometimes the smallest act, like following a dog into a snowstorm, can change more than one life. It can change yours too.